Hi, it's Alistair at Electric Scotland, doing my introduction for my newsletter for August 17th, 2018. Just like to give you an update on what's happening with moving to my new hosting provider. Made some good progress this week. We've now got Electric Scotland, Electric Canada is now up and running from the new hosting service in Vancouver. It'd obviously be interesting knowing if you notice any increase in speed. Seems to be loading faster. Essentially, I've got SSL certificates, which is the security certificates for both Electric Canadian and Electric Scotland. So if you're using the Google browser, for example, you should say secure against the URL in the browser line. Still got some things to work on. For example, the news feed isn't showing properly on the index page and what's new page of Electric Scotland. So I've asked the new hosting people to configure something for me there so it will display properly, and hopefully that'll happen by next week. And then there's a couple of things which have always been a bit of a problem with Electric Scotland, like the postcard service. So I'm hoping to get that resolved and fixed as well, and the other PHP programs that we run. I'm still waiting for Steve to provide me with the databases from the community and our mailing list and stuff like that. But he still hasn't come up with that yet. I'm phoning him quite regularly to try and get him to do it. The last time I talked to him, he said he would put it up last night, but that obviously didn't happen. And of course, that's one of the problems with Steve. He promises things and then simply doesn't do it. So, but at least I got FTP access back, so I was able to pull off the community program itself. But the databases are not accessible to me through FTP, so he has to zip them up and put them in a place where I can get hold of them. So I don't know how long that's going to take. But I am at least able to publish new content now up on Electric Canadian, Electric Scotland. Only did that last couple of days, so I've got some new stuff up for you for this week. And I'd also just like to recognise the horrible things that are going on in the world right now. For example, that drought in Australia is absolutely horrendous. I can only imagine what the farmers are feeling, seeing their cattle just dying in front of them with that massive drought in New South Wales especially. And obviously the wildfires in California and in British Columbia. In British Columbia, they've actually asked for a statewide state of emergency, over 500 wildfires going at the moment. And obviously with all the smoke, the air quality is terrible, in places like Vancouver and so forth. So my thoughts are going out to the people that are affected with that. So at the moment I've got some stories up for you from the news sources. The first story I have for you is a rare collection of Jacobite propaganda goes on show. So the exhibition, Genuine Jacobites, 100 years of Scottish propaganda, has been mounted at, I think it's Innerpeffray Library in Perthshire. So it's the oldest free public library in Scotland, and so if you're anywhere near there, you maybe want to take a trip. The next story I've got is, why won't more government ministers stick up for capitalism? It says, unlike her tiptoeing colleagues, Liz Truss is not scared to make big arguments. And I just thought I should put that up as a bit of a counter to Corbyn, who's basically very much for self-government, government control of everything. The next story, which is getting a lot of press, Johnson's leadership potential terrifies the party establishment. Says Tory has not previously expressed outrage a criticism of the burqa, so why now? Certainly that story is getting a lot of coverage in the general press. Then one I found in the Scotsman was, does Scotland actually care about education? It says further down the international league tables than the Scottish football team, for whom it is not an option to stop publishing results, which is the Scottish Government's preferred tactic on literacy and numeracy. Yeah, if you don't like the figures, just don't publish them. I mean, that's just unacceptable, really. You need to keep track of these, because if you're getting worse, that's telling you you've got a problem and you need to fix the problem, you know. And if you're trying to change something, you need to continue to get the figures to see if it's having any effect. So if you don't bother publishing the figures, I mean, how are you going to know if anything's happening, the positive or not? Then the next story, which I found again to do with Scotland and on the Scotsman, is government ready with Plan B for named person. So the accusation was made after documents retrieved via Freedom of Information showed that having a Plan B if MSPs reject the proposals was discussed at a meeting of unnamed government officials and advisors. You probably remember this named person scheme. The idea here was to have a named person for every child in Scotland. So if there's any problems, they could go to that named person and get help. But there was conflict with because they wanted to just share the information between anyone they wanted without getting permission. And so that was against the EU's standards. And therefore it was defeated, basically. And they've been trying to get it back, can't get it back, because they can't find wording that will keep the EU on their side. So this is a Plan B they've been discussing in private. Then the story was, call Swinney to account for catalogue of failures. As you know, Swinney was obviously leader of the SNP at one time. Then he became the deputy and the finance minister. But he's been put into this role as education minister to try to resolve the education issues, and he's having a lot of problems, I have to say. So while he might have been good at finance, he certainly doesn't seem to be very good at education. So that's an article about that. Then the bizarre spat with Canada shows Mohammed bin Salman's true colours, said the Saudi Crown Prince has been feted as a moderniser, but his petulant foreign policy should set alarm bells ringing. Sorry, couldn't read that. Yeah, I mean, this is something that's in Canada is pretty major, because he's pulling study students out of Canadian universities and colleges and getting them to go to other countries, and I don't know, it's certainly causing a lot of problems. Although you've got to put it in context, Saudi's not a great big, is not a major trader with Canada, but it's maybe a couple of billion, so it's not insignificant. But still, it's just going a bit too far, I think. The next story is, if the British lion is ever going to roar again, then the first step is to chuck Chequers, where a free and independent country will prosper if given a proper chance. So I thought that was a good story. Artificial intelligence did not miss a single urgent case. There's a lot of talk about artificial intelligence, but this is in the eye industry. And that story was particularly interesting because apparently the diagnosis of eye issues is quite problematic, and they're getting a lot wrong with it. So this artificial intelligence is basically saying it's got it about 96% right, which is pretty amazing. So it explains the background and the whole issue about doing diagnosis of eye diseases. Next story I have is free school meals year-round for low-income families. This is Margaret Kennedy, a dinner lady at St Andrews High during term time, is getting ready to serve the 20 or so primary-aged children who've come for their lunch. She tells me, "I love doing this, it's a pleasure." This is something where a lot of underprivileged kids, they found in the school holidays or the weekends are going hungry because it's only during term time and school time that they get a free meal. And they thought, well, that's not good if when they don't get going to school, they're probably not eating anything. So this is a way of giving them a kind of free lunch, which is nice. So it's worth reading the story because it might be something that you might want to talk about for your area, wherever you're living in the world. Then another story I said was mixed format should be repeated, but with more stars. This is where the men and women actually play together in golf, and it's a kind of unique concept. It's basically presented in Scotland, and certainly I thought it was, as it's a new breakthrough in the way dealing with golf, I thought it might be of interest to those golfers around. Then the next story I have, Scots scientists' battery breakthrough could revolutionise electric cars. Again, this is a scientific story, comes from the Scotsman. Great story that, and I thought you might be interested in that one. Then After Union, the Deluge. In a searching new book, Ian Keames reckons with the European Union's many failures and offers a disturbing prediction of its collapse. So those that want to be in the EU might want to read that as a possible future for them. And then considering that Scots took religion to all the countries of the world, and especially America, it's quite stunning to read, most Scots never pray and only attend church on special occasions. So Scots are becoming increasingly indifferent to religion, with the majority of young people describing themselves as not having any faith, according to new research. Quite a stunning change to when Scotland was fully engaged in religion. Next story I have for you is the sleepy village, once home to a bustling Pictish community. Not much happens in the sleepy village of St Vigins, but more than 1,000 years ago it was a bustling centre of Pictish life, which thronged with monks, pilgrims, and possibly even royalty. And then John Swinney warned to scrap the Primary 1 tests or face boycott. It says John Swinney has been presented with an ultimatum of scrapping the SNP's controversial Primary 1 tests or facing a mass boycott. And then the final story I have for you is What is No Deal? It's by Dr. Lee Rotherham, and it's a PDF report, so I thought I'd make that available for you to have a read at so you can understand what the no deal option is about. Then, as I say, I've got some content up for you this time, so under Electric Canadian, continue with Canada and its provinces. I put up volume 9, which is Industrial Expansion Part 1. I've got the Engineering Journal up. I've added the volume for 1949. Includes a whole variety of topics there. I got the Mining Review up, the volume for 1901. And I've got two individual books. One is a brief review of the settlement of Upper Canada. It's by the Yui Loyalists of Upper Canada, by Yui Loyalists and Scottish Highlanders in 1783, and of the grievances which compelled the Canadas to have recourse to arms in defence of their rights and liberties in the year 1837 and 1838. It's by D. MacLeod, who is Major General of the Patriot Army, Upper Canada, published in 1841. And then the other story I have for you is Dot It Down, A Story of Life in the Northwest by Alexander Begg, published in 1871. So a couple of interesting books. The Dot It Down is particularly good. The one above which is the UWE Highlanders. A wee bit more difficult to read, but certainly it's in 2 columns. And you know what it's like if you had to read 2 columns on the screen. You've really got to boost it up inside and then read down 1 column, scroll back up and read the next. But it's certainly an interesting book, so you might want to still have a read of that. Then for Electric Scotland, I've got Arden Moor Among the Hills. It's a record of scenery and sports in the Highlands of Scotland by Samuel Abbott. This was produced in 1876. And the other thing I've got for you is The Shipbuilders of Aberdeen. This is a series by Stanley Bruce, who is the Bard of Banff, as it happens. And he's doing a whole series of books about the shipbuilding industry in Aberdeen. And so he's got 2 books out. One is The Aberdeen Concrete Shipbuilding Company and Walder Hood and Company. And that Walder Hood and Company is in 2 parts. It's a much larger book than the other ones that are up there. So I've given the link to the page where all of the books will be appearing, and the 2 new ones are highlighted on the page. And then the story is The Battle of Worcester, September 3rd, 1661. It's by William Cohen. It's telling you a bit about the battle itself, but also in particular it's talking about the number of prisoners, Scots prisoners, and how a lot of them were sent to America as basically slaves, essentially. So it's telling you where they went and the numbers. So kind of an interesting wee story there. And that's basically it. So, obviously I'm having to rely on Steve to provide me with the database information to make progress on the community. That's holding me back. But I've got assurances from the new hosting company that once I've got them, they will work with me to get the thing reinstalled and everything working. So hopefully that will happen. Okay, so that's it for this week, and hopefully next week we'll see more progress being made. So thanks for listening, and as always there'll be a link to the Action newsletter where you can get links to all these stories I've mentioned in the comment section below this video. Okay, thanks for listening. Bye-bye.